So the book I chose for my book talk is Looking for Alaska by John Green, which won the 2006 Prince Award, and the book itself was published in 2005, I believe. So, incidentally, I don't have my copy on me. Typically, I do because this book is actually my favorite book. I chose it because I've read it many times, and I mean I chose it for other reasons too, which I'll specify as we go on. But yeah, just as an introduction, published in 2005. And so the main character through whom the narrative is told is Miles Halter. He's the 16-year-old white kid from Florida, and he moves to Alabama for boarding school in the middle of high school. So he kind of is very socially isolated throughout his whole life. He has a going away party at the very beginning of the book, and like two people show up, and so it seems like he hasn't really made his mark, and that's his goal, is to make his mark, and his goal is seeking the great perhaps. So he is just trying to embark on some adventures and have some stories to tell. But anyway, so he moves to Alabama to this boarding school. His roommate is this guy named Chip Martin, also white, very low income, but they're on a scholarship. And then through him, he meets Alaska Young, who, is, as the title suggests, looking for Alaska. So Alaska Young, all these kids, I think, are 16. Alaska is this kind of incredibly smart, very raw, emotionally open, very emotional herself, to the point where Miles is frequently turned off by her because of she'll be clingy and happy one second and then the next completely breaking down and like flooding tears. So he oftentimes is frustrated by their friendship. And then there's some secondary characters. There's this guy Takumi who is an international kid, I believe. I don't know which. I know he's Asian. I don't know which country he's from particularly. There's a girl named Lara who is. And Miles, the main character, his nickname is Pudge ironically, because he's very skinny. So Lara is Pudge's, I would say, fill-in romantic interest because he's in love with Alaska, but Alaska is dating another guy, Jake, who doesn't go to the school. But she's frequently talking about, kind of flirting with Pudge and being like, "You're really cute. If only I wasn't so in love with my amazing boyfriend." So that's another kind of source of frustration for Pudge, Miles, that she is, in a way, she tends to like frequently leads him on. So yeah, those are the characters. John Green himself, as I'm looking at his Wikipedia page, he's 40 now. So at the time the book came out, I guess he wrote it when he was like 27. So pretty young. It was his debut novel. He's from Indiana. He's a white dude. So, not an author of color, obviously. Initially I wanted to find a book that, from an author who told a narrative through a marginalized perspective. So I was looking for, a person of color, or a narrative from a person of color, or, a narrative from a gay, lesbian, bi, LGBTQ plus. But incidentally, this book felt right because it's my favorite, and the reason I think it's important, and I actually argue that it is told, I guess not told from a marginalized narrative or perspective, but it deals with marginalized concepts, and that's what I really want to talk about and why I think that it should be taught in classrooms. So the first thing I want to start with, which is kind of abstract, but this is just opinion-based, is, in schools, I think everything is taught, everything is so calculated. Math, history, all that stuff, science, there's obviously curriculums. For English too. But I always have thought for English there's been a little more leeway. There's not like, there's always, if I talk to a kid in California in junior year of high school, we're both learning about logarithms, in like September or whenever you learn them. But maybe I've read The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian and he read The Kite Runner, So I've always felt like English provided the most wiggle room, even though there kind of isn't in a way because there is still a curriculum. And like there definitely needs to be more work representing many groups of people of color, people of different sexual identities or orientations, cultures, ethnicities, what have you. But something that I've noticed is we don't teach emotional or mental health. And beyond that, we don't teach happiness. And so, like, I think something that this class has kind of made me realize is that I really want to rethink the way things are, because there is always something you're not missing every time. There's always something you're missing every time you take something exactly the way it is and do it over and over again. Because, like, obviously we're whitewashing all these curriculums and no one would have noticed. It wouldn't have been noticed probably by white people if it wasn't brought to their attention. I didn't realize that there was so much whitewashing going on until, in high school, my professor's like, hey, did you ever realize that our history books are biased? Like, look at the authors, they're white, we're telling white history. And I was like, my mind was blown. And it continues to be blown every class I take with this kind of material. And this might be met with a little bit of controversy considering I'm not a licensed teacher or, I can't claim to know what to teach anyone, but the thing about looking for Alaska major theme is just having stories to tell and leaving a good mark somewhere. And I think that's something like individuality should be taught instead of like meeting a certain standard collectively, because it doesn't account for every type of person. So I definitely think that individuality and coming into someone's own is a major theme, and that's something really interesting to teach in schools because I think it's very different, and it's good to teach kids and people that it's good and okay to be unique. It's okay to be unique, and it's really beneficial because it's beneficial to, primarily yourself, but then also what you can bring to the world around you. And then the last thing I want to talk about is that since I've been in college, I've learned, especially in this class, I've read, learned, and listened about many forms of misrepresentation and underrepresentation of race, sexual identity, orientation, ethnicity, culture, and so I have realized the importance of accounting for everyone. And as someone who has had tremendous struggles with mental illness in the past, I have never felt represented either in like literature that's taught or like media or anything like that. And from that, it's easy to feel so marginalized and alone. And so obviously I have like a tremendous amount of privilege being white. I cannot begin to fathom a lot of things that minorities and people of color, etc., go through, but something that I can relate to is not feeling represented. And Alaska is mentally ill, and she ultimately, she dies in a car accident. Sorry, spoiler alert. And it's kind of what the whole book is centered around. That's just her death is the major event, and everything before it is labeled as 100 days before, 50 days before, 20 days before, etc. And then after, 20 days after, 30 days after, where Chip and Takumi and Miles are all trying to kind of piece together what happened, because they don't know, because she was mentally ill. I mean, it was never diagnosed specifically, but the signs are so clear. Like, she was emotionally erratic. She was always joking about and talking about suicide. And so the whole issue with her death, she was drunk and she was driving her car to presumably go to her mother's grave. But, I mean, they don't know that. So they're trying to solve this mystery. All they know is she's drunk and driving. And so they find her, and she had crashed into a police car, and she, died on the scene. So they don't know whether it was an accident or she meant to kill herself. And so I just think that, obviously it's not the best. It's not a great ending at all, but just the fact that someone prior to her death, and it is open-ended, we are still not sure whether it was suicide or just an accident, but prior to her death, she was just so vivacious and full of life and so bubbly, and everyone loved her. And so it was really good to see someone who was mentally ill still thriving and having friends and living this good life and leaving her mark. And so it's a really good book. It is kind of a love story between Miles and Alaska. It's also a good story of friendship, and also how Miles was kind of a loner, and he cannonballs into this completely foreign situation and walks out with so many great friends. And so I think that's also something good to teach kids too, is to take risks, and they will pay off. I mean, obviously Alaska's death is completely unfortunate, but just the fact that they got to meet each other and benefit each other while they were in each other's lives is really great. And I could talk about this book for many more hours. So I hope I covered all the points, and if you have any more questions, please feel free to email me. Okay, thank you.